Hello, my name is Brenda Neece, and I'm the curator and founder of the Cello Museum. I want to begin by thanking Franciszek and the Waltham Forest Cello Fest for inviting the Cello Museum to participate in this Cello Weekend. Cello Museum team members Erica, Lessie, Renata Kwan, and I are very happy to be here today with you as part of this remarkable Cello Fest. We are here today to give you an introduction to the Cello Museum and tell you about its first exhibition, Innovations in Cello-Making Materials. After our presentation, you will have a chance to win an exhibition t-shirt, and we will have a Q&A session. Please note that you may ask your questions at any time during the presentation, but we will hold them until the end and do our best to get to all of them then. And now, I want to introduce you to the Cello Museum, starting with the basics. Number 1, what the Cello Museum is. 2, who it's for. 3, its aims, and 4, where you can find it. What is the Cello Museum? The Cello Museum is an online platform that includes cello news, articles about the cello, cello exhibitions, and due to the pandemic, we've added listings of online cello concerts and events. Although this was not part of our original vision, we felt this was an important thing to add at this time. Basically, the focus of the Cello Museum is almost all things cello, not to be presumptuous. Who is it for? The Cello Museum is for everyone who loves the cello, cellists and non-cellists alike. How many of you cellists in the audience have been told after a concert, the cello is my favorite instrument? Unlike some other platforms that provide information exclusively for cellists, we are for listeners too, and everyone who loves the cello, specialists and non-specialists alike. Think along the lines of the History Channel, which is created by historians and aimed at history buffs. The Cello Museum is created by cello historians, cellists, and other specialists and aimed at everyone who loves the cello. What are its aims? Rostropovich said that it was his aim, his destination in life to make the cello as beloved an instrument as the violin and piano. We think he, along with a number of other cellists, achieved this goal, and now we want to continue to spread the love and knowledge of the cello around the world. The cello is used in many contexts now. Our mission is to present an interdisciplinary view of the cultural and technical history of the cello, as well as perspective of its place in the world today in its many widely varied contexts, to cellists and non-cellists who love the cello. With its expanding reach and uses in diverse contexts, we aim to foster connections among performers, teachers, researchers, composers, students, and audiences. Our vision is to inspire, educate, and entertain. Now, the most common question we get is, where is the Cello Museum? What is the address? How can I get there? Well, the Cello Museum is entirely online. To my knowledge, the Cello Museum is the first of its kind, a specialist museum that is entirely online and conceived as such, even before the pandemic. This allows us to be free and accessible 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to anyone with internet access. And now I'll give you a tour of the museum. Welcome to the Cello Museum. I'm going to take you on a quick tour. As you can see, the museum is organized around our 3 original topics: cello news, cello articles, and what really sets us apart from other online cello sites, our exhibitions area. Let's take a quick look at these 3 topics. First, the news. We do a weekly cello news roundup at the end of every week. We look for cellos and cellists appearing in the mainstream news, as well as in the usual places like the Strad, Strings Magazine, and the Violin Channel. We pick a few articles each week to highlight. We also look for new albums, podcasts, and videos. Since there have been so many wonderful online concerts and events during the pandemic, we added weekly listings of those as well. At first, we added these to our news roundups, but as the number of events grew, we separated them. You can find them here. As you can see, we organize them into 2 parts. We start with online performances, and part of the way down the page, you'll find online events here. Then each section is organized by date and time, but make sure when you look at the listings, check the time zones, ticket or registration availability, prices, and cancellations. Now, let's look at the articles. We publish a new article every week on cello-related topics. We have a regular series as follows. The first week of every month, we have the Curator's Corner. This is where you can find out what's going on during the month at the Cello Museum. The third week of every month, we have an article by our cello music editions expert, Dr. Leonovich. In the last week of every month, we have postcards from Anika. This is a series entitled That's What She Said, Unaccompanied Works for Solo Cello by Women Composers. Each month, she highlights 3 pieces in brief digital postcards organized by level of technical difficulty: novice, intermediate, and advanced. Other articles each month are based on cello birthdays or special months of the year. For example, last month was Photography Month, so we featured the artistic collaboration of photographer Robert Doisneau and cellist Maurice Baquet. In this article, you'll see many familiar cello images. This month, we are also starting a new series on cello bows by our new cello bow expert, Andrew Bellis. Let's turn to our third focus, exhibitions. We aim to add a new exhibition every 6 months to a year. As we are just starting out, this cycle may change. Our first exhibition is Innovations in Cello-Making Materials. I'll be giving you a tour of the exhibition shortly, so I won't go into detail about it now. This January, we also started a book club, and we hold Zoom meetings with authors every other month. Last month, we met with Kadiatu Canna-Mason to talk about her book, House of Music, Raising the Canna-Masons. Next month, we will meet with author Kitty Lambton to discuss her novella, The Cellist's Notebook. It's free to join the book club. You just sign up here, and you'll get information about how to join our Zoom meetings. We also have an online museum shop where we sell t-shirts, posters, mugs, tote bags, and other gifts. At the end of this presentation, you'll have a chance to win a free t-shirt with our new exhibition design. We will be adding it to the shop soon, but this is a chance to get one before they are generally available. We're also working on an online cello bookshop with plans to launch it before the end of the year. If you're interested in keeping up with all of the Cello Museum news, I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. You can see some sample newsletters by clicking on the links here. Before I introduce you to the people behind the museum, I invite you to join our Cello Museum family on social media as well. We have almost 23,000 followers on Facebook. We use our social media channels primarily to post birthday tributes to cellists and to composers who have given us cello repertoire. You can find links to all of our social media channels up here at the top. Thank you for joining me on this quick tour of the Cello Museum. Now I want to tell you about the origins of the museum and introduce you to my fellow curator, Erika Lessie. See you soon. Before taking you on a tour of our current exhibition, I want to tell you more about the people behind the Cello Museum. I'll begin by telling you a bit more about myself as the founder and curator. Again, my name is Brenda Neece, and I am obsessed with cellos. One of my doctoral supervisors at Oxford said that I had cellos on the brain, and this makes sense because I moved to Oxford for 3 reasons. 1, I wanted to learn to produce the dark, rich singing tone that I associated with British cellists, what I thought of as the British cello sound. 2, I had been accepted as a student of William Pleath, who taught my hero, Jacqueline Dupre. And 3, I wanted to study British cello history under the supervision of another of my heroes, Jeremy Montague, who was at that time the curator of the Bate collection at the University of Oxford. You can read more about me on my team profile on the Cello Museum site, but as the founder of the Cello Museum, I want to tell you how the museum came into being. In the autumn of 2019, I was in Oxford and paid a visit to Jeremy Montague, my old doctoral supervisor, who was 91 at the time. The idea came to me in a flash as Jeremy and I talked on that beautiful October afternoon. The purpose of my visit was both social and professional. I was there to catch up and also to talk to him about Egyptian musical instruments. After my visit to the UK, I was off to Egypt for a Nile tour, and I knew that Jeremy had served there in his time in the British Army. I had no notion of talking to him about cellos as we had talked so often in my student days, but as usual, he asked when I was going to get back to working in a museum. To give you some background, immediately after leaving Oxford, I took up the post as the first curator of the Musical Instrument Museum at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina. After just over a decade there, I left to pursue my interests in the cello and in photography. Since that time, Jeremy had been trying to persuade me to get back into the museum world, occasionally offering to put me forward for a job, sending me job listings, and asking me about museum jobs every time I visited him. So sitting with Jeremy that day, I knew the topic would come up at some point that afternoon. But this time, as our conversation turned to my career, I said, Jeremy, if only there were a cello museum, then I'd want to get back to museum work. If this had been a cartoon, a light bulb would have appeared over my head at that moment, along with the text, I will make a cello museum online. Jeremy seemed to see my eyes glaze over in delight at this aha moment, because I remember his big smile. Then he started firing questions at me like he did in my student days, adding comments about his own experiences. We discussed the value of freely sharing information, making it readily available to all who are interested, and how such a museum could be made a reality. As I walked back to my lodgings in Oxford that afternoon, I thought to myself that I had just had what was possibly the most valuable tutorial I'd ever had with him. My next 2.5 weeks involved a tour of some of the most famous sites of Egypt, with visits to prominent Egyptological collections in the UK beforehand. Although these were unrelated to the cello, as I visited numerous museums and historic sites, my mind was working on how to create the Cello Museum online without a physical presence. When I returned to my home in North Carolina from my adventures in Egypt and the UK, I started to build the Cello Museum, beginning with the Cello Museum team. This included an anonymous sponsor and advisor, 2 official advisors in organology, Jeremy Montague and Lawrence Libben, an anonymous advertising and web expert with 5 years of musical instrument museum experience, and another cello specialist with interests that overlap but also complement my own, Lessie, who is here with us today. Our team has since grown to include Dr. Yuri Leonovich, our cello edition specialist, Andrew Bellis, our bow specialist, who used to give bow workshops at the Bate collection in Oxford, Renata Kwan, who is here with us today, and who is our content editor and advertising manager, and our intern, Jonathan Simmons. We have another intern in training as well. I'm very sad that Jeremy Montague passed away at almost the same moment that I announced the museum opening date. I will always remain grateful to him for all of his help with the museum, and moreover, for his guidance over 3 decades. I am sad that he did not live to see the launch of the Cello Museum. On what would have been his 93rd birthday last December, we dedicated the Cello Museum to Jeremy's memory and made this mixed media painting of him to be presented to the Bate collection with a copy for his family to be delivered when travel has opened up more after the pandemic. As I mentioned earlier, Lessie, my fellow curator and researcher, is here with us today, all the way from Chicago, Illinois. I didn't think it was possible until I met Erica, but I think Erica might be as cello obsessed as I am. I have known Erica and admired her work for nearly 30 years. Now, it is my very great pleasure to introduce Erica Lessie.
Hi, my name is Erica Lessie, and I am with the Cello Museum. I am a professional cellist in Chicago. I teach mainly at Shy Arts, which is a community high school for the arts, at Old Town School of Folk Music and DePaul Community Music Division. And I'm a freelancer in Chicago as well. I received a Bachelor's of Music from Indiana University, a Master's of Music from Florida State, and I have an unfinished doctorate from Florida State, which is where I met Brenda years ago in grad school. My main interests currently are in women composers and in unusual cellos. I formed a duo a few years back. It's a flute and cello duo dedicated to playing women composers, and we are called Styrofoam. And I recently started Cellos of Unusual Shape. So I will be going out and giving lectures on my unusual cellos. I've known Brenda for years, and we were talking a few years ago about maybe we would do a book together. And then last year she came to me and she said that she wanted to start an online cello museum. And would I be a contributor to that? And I'm very happy to do so. My official name is Researcher and Guest Curator. So I write a monthly column about solo pieces for cello by women composers. And I present 3 every month. And I'm also helping Brenda with various articles, doing the research, and with the exhibitions. And my doctoral subject, my thesis would have been on unusual cellos or variant cellos. So I'm really happy to be working with the museum about this and to contribute my research to the museum. I thought I would present just a few cellos today. This one in the corner over here is actually by Eric Oren of Minnesota. The top of the instrument is an old plow handle. The bottom is a crutch, and the middle part is a violin case, and an old wooden violin case. And the strings are actually made out of weed whack. So it's a very interesting instrument. Though it's tall, you have to play it standing up. It is actually tuned like a cello. So I consider it a cello. This instrument next to me, probably some of you have either played one or you own one. This is a carbon fiber cello by Lewis and Clark out of Boston. Luis Leguia years ago was, he likes to go boating, and he had a carbon fiber boat, and he was listening to the sound of the waves against the carbon fiber and thought that this would make an interesting cello. And he was in the Boston Symphony for years and developed this cello with a boat maker, Clark. The next cello I have here is a baby or miniature uncello. And this was created by Dennis Bathory Kitts. And for I think in 1978, for an unusual opera that was premiered at the World Trade Center, of all places. There was a video of the opera, but it did not survive. So what's interesting about this instrument is, even though the original instrument was only performed once, I believe, for that opera, this has become a favorite for people to make for the Science Olympiad in high school for that contest. And there have been several teams of girls who have created these, and this actually was created for the Science Olympiad, this instrument, and they were kind enough to donate it to me. The girls who created this one were Emily Weisner and Marky Gable. So the dad donated it to me. I was very happy to have it. I have not performed it yet, and I'd like to have a full size at some point, but this is what I have at the moment. The next instrument is also by Eric Oren, the same man who made the one in the corner. He called this the Norwegian lap cello. And it fits very nicely in the lap. You can see that it's got a very short fingerboard. And the back is interesting. This makes it very hard to get your thumb around. So I've had to develop a new technique to play this instrument. And then the last one in the corner over here is by Ken Butler, and it's called the Silver Bow Cello. And it's got 10 strings on it. It's got a whammy bar in this corner, and you can play the individual strings bowed or plucked. And it's got a contact mic, and this is the only one of the instruments I have here that are electric. I do also have a theremin cello, a regular electric cello, and a 5-string cello, and a number of other unusual cellos, but I couldn't fit all of them in the screen today. So hopefully you have enjoyed my short presentation, and I hope to answer questions for you.
Now it's time for a tour of the Cello Museum's exhibition, Innovations in Cello-Making Materials. Before we begin, I'd like to address one concern we've heard from visitors, particularly on social media. This is a misconception that by having a cello museum, we are taking cellos out of the hands of cellists and putting them into glass cases somewhere. I can assure you that this is not the case. While it would be wonderful to be surrounded by a building full of cellos, the online platform allows us to display instruments without taking them out of circulation. In other words, no cellos are held in captivity. While images, videos, and descriptions of the instruments are available for study, the instruments themselves are still out in the wild. This allows us to gather together cellos that would otherwise be difficult to display together, such as ice cellos alongside metal cellos. We feel even the disadvantages of not having the cellos ready for cellists to try at one central location are by far outweighed by the fact that we redirect visitors to where they can see these instruments in their home institutions or purchase instruments directly from makers. As I said earlier, the Cello Museum aims to help people make connections. Here we help connect our visitors with cellos and makers they might otherwise miss. Now, let's look at some innovations in cello making materials. Although Erica, Lessie, and I worked together on this exhibition, by and large, the cellos you see here are ones she discovered through her doctoral research. Our initial intention was to pull together a collection of instruments showing innovations in cello making materials and design. However, what began as a list of about 5 cellos soon grew to a much larger group of instruments, so we decided to split our originally conceived exhibition of innovations in cello design into 2 parts. The first part you see here as Innovations in Cello Making Materials. The second part will be coming soon in another exhibition entitled Innovations in Cello Design. So, the instruments you see here are part 1 of this project. While you will see a number of instruments that differ from standard cellos, their main difference from standard cellos is arguably primarily in the materials from which they are made. This means that while the instruments you will see here exhibit some variations in terms of shape and design, most are easily identified as cellos, even at a glance. Our upcoming exhibition will explore the many shapes and physical designs that have been used for the cello. For most people, a cello is a cello. Definitions are not required for most garden variety cellos one encounters on a day-to-day basis. However, we are about to see some unusual instruments, so we need to ask, what is a cello? For this exhibition, our definition of a cello matches that of the maker. If a maker calls it a cello, even if it is played by striking or scraping it rather than by bowing or plucking a string, we define it as a cello. Why? Because we are exploring what makers are doing with new materials to create instruments for cellists. So, all the instruments here, with perhaps one exception, look like cellos. From the beginning, luthiers have experimented with the materials they use for cello making. Traditional makers compared maple and poplar and other woods for cello backs and ribs. During the 18th and 19th centuries, in small villages, without fiddle makers, local blacksmiths or even shoemakers would make cellos out of materials they had at hand, like iron or copper. Cellos in this exhibition range from the long-lived metal instruments to the ephemeral ice cellos. The youngest maker represented was 12 when she made her first instrument. The construction of cellos included here was influenced by seemingly unlikely sources, from the use of high-tech molds to glass blowing, from 3D printing to the same type of hammerwork used to create the noses of bullet trains. The cellos that follow range from the late 18th century through 2019. When we organized them, they fell into 5 types of materials: metal, glass, ice, plastics, and fiber. Now, let's go look at some cellos. We'll start with metal cellos, but before diving in, one quick note about how to navigate this exhibition. As you can see, the main exhibition page is organized by the 5 materials represented, beginning with metal cellos. Under the introduction to each type of material, you can see thumbnails of the cellos in that section. Click on a cello to see more information about it. To go to the next cello, simply scroll to the bottom of the page and click Next, or if you want to go to the previous cello, click on Previous. If you'd like to go back to the main exhibition page, click this button. And if you want to learn more about the cello maker, click About the Artist, and that will open up a tab that will tell you about the maker of the instrument on that page. Also, keep in mind that the search bar can help you quickly find a specific maker or instrument. Now, let's turn to the metal cellos. Metal cellos represent the oldest as well as one of the newest instruments in this exhibition. Let's take a closer look at a few of these cellos, starting with the 3 metal English church cellos. This was one of the cellos I examined in the course of my doctoral research, and it's currently located in the Wiltshire Museum in Devizes. It's originally from Milton Lilburn, where it was played in an old church band, like the ones that Thomas Hardy describes in his novels, short stories, and poems. Hardy's grandfather was a church cellist, and Hardy himself collected church band music and instruments, including a cello. While very crude in its outline, it was made by hand with a lot of attention to detail. The maker even cut notches into the F-holes, which you can see have been ignored in the museum's setup here from the 1990s. The wooden scroll and peg box were made with love by someone who had seen a professionally made cello, but did not have the skill to recreate one. Even so, the maker did not have to make a scroll, but chose to do so. This cello was made before the general use of the end pen and still had its in button. This is one of the number of cellos I discovered in this state in the course of my doctoral work, even though I had been warned when I started my research that none were left in this early condition at that time. The next church cello was played in the West Gallery of St. Lawrence's Church in Caterham, Surrey. Unlike the previous cello, although it was made of metal, it was painted to look as if it were made of wood. The Caterham cello was made by a local shoemaker and was in near playing condition when I examined it. The third metal church cello is the most refined of the 3, a copper cello now in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Notice the much more refined outline and details. The person who made this copper cello was familiar with standard wooden instruments, even mimicking the purfling on a wooden instrument. It was owned and played by members of the Martin family in the Bosham Parish Church, Holy Trinity. This cello was likely the subject of a notice posted on the door of Bosham Parish Church in 1844. It was later discovered in the parish chest in the church and quoted in one of my favorite church band resources, Canon K.H. McDermott's The Old Church Gallery Minstrels. It reads, "Whereas some evil-disposed person or persons did last evening, during the usual time of ringing the church bells, enter the sacred edifice, and wantonly and maliciously destroy 3 of the principal strings of the bass viol in the gallery. Whoever will give information to the church wardens so as to lead to the conviction of the offender or offenders of such sacrilegious conduct, the informers thereof will meet with a satisfactory reward." Henry Brooker, Church Warden, Parish of Bosham, February 25th, 1844. Now let's look at one of the newest instruments in the exhibition, a steel cello by Jared Harris, who goes by the name Uncontained Curiosity on YouTube. Jared Harris is a mechanical engineer by profession and an avid cellist. After working in a job that involved a lot of steel enclosures and sheet metal, in 2019, Harris was inspired to use this material to build a cello. Long before he decided to make a cello out of steel, he had a new concept for his design. He wanted to modify the standard cello construction to take advantage of the properties of this new cello-making material. I encourage you to watch his videos. We've embedded 3 of them in the description of the cello. In these photos, you can see the cello before and after Jared painted it black. The last of the metal cellos I'll show you today is one of my favorites. In 2008, several of these aluminum cellos were created as showpieces to demonstrate the extraordinary skill of the makers. A Japanese sheet metal processing company employs highly skilled craftsmen to hammer aluminum sheets with a special technique to create precisely curved surfaces of the nose sections of bullet trains. Using their exceptional hammering skills and relying on both their experience and intuition, they carefully control the strength and location of each blow to shape the noses of the bullet trains. As it would be too costly to replace these skilled craftsmen with machines, these train noses are still made by hand. The aluminum cello and violins they made weigh approximately twice as much as their wooden counterparts, making the violins in particular difficult to play. As exhibited in Tokyo in 2009, the violins were then being made out of magnesium to reduce their weight, but we have not seen magnesium cellos yet. Please let us know if you see one. The president of the company said he wanted to prove that a hammer could be used to fashion the delicate curves of a cello, and that his dream is that the instrument will one day be played by world-renowned cellist Yo-Yo Ma. Mr. Ma, if you're watching this, we'd love to hear you play this cello. Now we turn to glass cellos. When someone mentions musical instruments made of glass, the first instrument that springs to my mind is Ben Franklin's glass harmonica from 1761, which was inspired by musical glasses he heard during his time in London and Paris. Other instruments one might think of are glass bells, or even flutes. Glass flutes survived from the early 19th century, and you can buy a glass flute on Amazon today. But glass cellos? They would certainly not be robust enough for use in school strings classes. For the professional, having to transport a glass cello would be an adventure. Can you imagine having to take a glass cello with you on a flight? However, these cellos do exist, and the skills required to make them are mind-boggling. We know of 2 different makers, each using a different glass-making technique. The first is the Japanese glass company Hario, known for its tea and coffee pots. They made several instruments in the early 2000s, including one glass-blown cello. The second is glass artist Gary Word. He has been making cellos for over a decade, and through the creation of several prototypes has arrived at his final glass cello model. He uses a kiln forming glass technique, creating his cellos out of 33 pieces of glass. Do you know of any other glass cellos? If so, please let us know about them. Now, let's take a closer look at these 2 types of glass cellos. The Hario Glass Company of Japan makes glass tea and coffee pots. However, near the turn of the century, the company decided to make a violin and a cello. They began with the violin and called it the Hiram Glass Violin. Please take a look at the information on our website. You can click through to watch a video on how Hario artists created these instruments. In a nutshell, they put melted glass into a cello-shaped mold and then blew the glass to create the shape. They made 40 successful cello bodies using this method. The glass blowers had to be highly skilled, and they relied on intuitive breath control to create a consistent thickness. Out of these 40 bodies, only one survived to the final stage of the building process to become a complete cello. In 2004, Hario announced that their cello was the only cello made from glass in existence. Although there are other glass cellos now, the Hario glass cello is still the only blown glass cello of which we are aware. The completed cello weighs approximately 25¼ pounds. That's 11 kilograms, whereas a standard cello made out of wood weighs between 5 and 7 pounds, which is 2.27 to 2.72 kilograms. Please contact us if you have more information about this cello. The other glass cellos Erica discovered are made by the wonderful artist Gary Word. Gary Word began the journey to create his beautiful ice-like glass cellos about 15 years ago. He first experimented with making glass violins and then wanted to make cellos. In addition to using his own expertise in working with glass, Word learned from luthiers, and his cellos are a result of his blend of these two arts. Word makes full-size cellos out of 33 formed glass sections, and the entire construction process takes him 6 months. When Word first started making cellos, having already made violins, he found that increasing the size of the instruments had its challenges. One of the main problems to overcome was the instrument's weight. A high-grade crystal glass cello weighs 34.7 pounds. That's 15.74 kilograms, even more than the blown glass Hario cello. If you watch the videos we've got in our exhibition, you can see how the cellos have extra stands in addition to their end pins to help carry their weight. After building 4 prototypes, Word arrived at his final version. Here are 3 of these prototypes. And here is his final model. As Ben Franklin created the glass harmonica, it is fitting that Word's glass cello has been played at the Benjamin Franklin Museum in Philadelphia. Go to our exhibition to hear this performance and watch as Gary Word builds a cello. People often say that Word's cellos look as if they are made of ice. Now we turn to cellos that really are made out of ice. Introducing ice cellos. Ice cellos are the most ephemeral instruments in the exhibition. Those who play ice cellos aren't snobs about the age of their instruments. Rather than having a lifelong relationship with these cellos, players gain from the short-lived and temperature-sensitive experience of interacting with them. There are roughly 2 types of ice cellos. The concept for the first type was created by composer Jim McWilliams. He first envisioned an ice cello for cellist Charlotte Moorman in 1972. He gave her verbal instructions for the piece, and it became one of her signature works. The ice cellos in this instance do not have strings and are not played in the traditional manner with bowing or plucking. McWilliams' ice music is about time and how it affects us. Cellist Joan Jeanrenaud revived the work in 2001, nearly 30 years after Moorman's premiere. She made use of modern technology to enhance the performance. Taking the piece even further, Seth Parker Woods and Spencer Topel performed their own version of the work on the 45th anniversary of Moorman's London premiere. Woods and Topel added layers of both meaning and technology to the work in an artistic call to action for our own time. The second type of ice cellos are more like standard cellos in that they have strings and are played using more traditional techniques. In addition to the element of time explored in the previous examples, these cellos also make us consider our relationship with nature. This is an intersection of cellos and our current climate crisis. Let's look at these 2 types of ice cellos, starting with those that resulted from the collaboration of Jim McWilliams and Charlotte Moorman nearly 50 years ago. Charlotte Moorman is the name we usually associate with ice cellos from the 1970s, but her ice cello performances were first conceived by Jim McWilliams and were one of their many successful collaborations. Ice music was so successful that it became one of Moorman's signature works. McWilliams gave Moorman verbal instructions for this new work. She was to make a cello out of ice and then play it until it melted, while wearing only a garland of fresh flowers around her neck. The idea was that the piece would last forever, and when the ice melted, she'd be left with nothing. McWilliams' piece explored the concept and meaning of time, the time it took for the ice to melt, the time it took for the flowers to wilt, and the time it took for the music to be made. At the end of this time, both performer and audience are left with nothing tangible. Moorman first performed ice music in London on a cello made of ice cubes. The concert organizers had created the cello by filling a soft cello case with ice cubes and then freezing it. This instrument is the only one in this exhibition that might not be identified as a cello at first glance, because it looked like a cello-sized blob of ice cubes stuck together. Moorman was not happy with this instrument, but played the concert anyway using a narrow piece of clear plexiglass for a bow. Moorman performed ice music 6 more times, but never again used a cello made of ice cubes. Instead, she played ice cellos created by ice sculptors. Sometimes she provided them with a paper template to use. Here's one she played in Washington, D.C. In 2001, cellist Joan Jeanrenaud worked with McWilliams and several other artists to recreate Moorman's 1972 ice music for London. However, she used a sculpted rather than an ice cube cello. Unlike Moorman, she did not perform in the nude. Even so, her revival of ice music required great endurance. It lasted about 3.5 hours, and she used bows made of split bamboo, barbed wire, and rasps. In addition, she used a hacksaw and a pitchfork to destroy the cello in the end. Jeanrenaud's performance made use of modern technology. Composer and sound artist Gregory Kuhn amplified and enhanced the sound of the water dripping off the melting ice cello. During at least one of these performances, a spotlight created shadows of Jeanrenaud and made the ice cello appear to glow. For the 45th anniversary of Moorman's ice cello debut, cellist Seth Parker Woods and composer Spencer Topel reimagined the work in the context of our world today, adding layers of meaning in their ice bodies, Ice Music for Chicago. In addition to exploring the implications and effects of the passage of time, Woods and Topel explored issues of police brutality and corruption, prison abuse, and mental health. They experimented to find a method to make it an obsidian color. In addition, they embedded pickup mics in the ice. During the performance, they added a male voice reciting poetic phrases sonically diffused on spatialized glass sculptures to evoke the isolation and neglect felt by those battling mental disorders. Woods and Topel made this piece their own, with profound meaning and an artistic call to action for our own time. Now we turn to the more traditionally played ice cellos, starting with those made by Tim Linhart, who makes many types of ice instruments, including ice cellos. Linhart has been building ice cellos for 20 years, and in that time he has made 26 and counting. It takes Linhart about a week to construct the ice body of a cello. Inside the instrument is a metal spine, and this, along with a wooden neck, fingerboard, and traditional tailpiece, is reused each year. Linhart's ice cellos have thick ice bridges with a metal guard on top to protect them from the cello strings. In addition to being an expert with ice, Linhart also studied traditional cello making, learning about shapes and thicknesses. Even after an ice cello has been completed, the ice continues to move under the tension of the strings. Another issue is maintaining the thickness of the instrument. Sublimation results in the thinning of the plates, so to maintain an ice cello, water must be sprayed onto the instrument regularly. Even with 20 years of experience, Linhart is always observing and learning, and he says he recently made a new discovery. Instead of using still water, he used water with bubbles. The resulting material was more opaque and much lighter than usual. He calls it foam ice. The cellos he makes with it are louder and have a warmer tone than the others. Bill Covitz also makes ice musical instruments. He's been making ice cellos for about 15 years. He's made 10 to 12 instruments, each differing slightly from the next. Working with ice gives him the flexibility to be creative and experiment with the shapes and sizes of the instruments. He collaborates with cellists to personalize each instrument. He aims to create instruments to match the ideas in the minds of the performers. If he has everything he needs on site, he can make a cello in 4 to 5 hours. He makes the bodies of the cellos from ice and uses wooden necks and fingerboards. He adds extra ice at the bottom of the cello and a metal rod to hold the instrument in place. Sometimes he has to add a piece of wood between the ice and the tailgut, depending on the temperature. Covitz told me that every musician who comes to play the ice instruments is told not to have preconceived notions, to have no expectations at concerts. Playing ice cellos is all about the experience. Now we turn to cellos made of plastics. Plastics represented in this exhibition include styrofoam, 3D printed plastic, and plastic Lego bricks. Let's dive right in. The first of these cellos I'm going to talk about today is by our youngest maker, Anika Boken, who was 12 years old when she made this cello. She was inspired by another maker whose work you can see in this part of the exhibition and whose work I'm going to show you in the section on fiber cellos, Tim Doerink. Doerink's experimental styrofoam cello got a lot of press in Belgium, and after seeing it on TV and in the newspaper, 12-year-old Anika decided to build her own experimental cello for a school project. One of the problems Doerink had with his styrofoam cello was how to keep the styrofoam from collapsing under the pressure of string tension. He ended up reinforcing his cello with other materials, as you can see in the exhibition. Anika's solution was to try a different type of styrofoam. With some help from her father and his friend Bruno, Anika decided to try an XPS styrofoam rather than an EPS. She explained that XPS is a rigid styrofoam used as an insulation material and is more pressure resistant than EPS. Here's the next cello made of plastics I'm going to show you today. It is this prize-winning 3D printed cello made by Maddie Frank. Frank initially made everything on this cello using a 3D printer with the exception of the strings, tail gut, end pin, and end pin screw. After entering the instrument in the 2019 Additive Manufacturing Users Group Advanced Finishing Competition and tying for first place, she had a luthier fit the cello with standard pegs, fine tuners, and a new bridge to make the instrument easier to play. Frank used her standard cello as a model. Using a digital scanning arm, Frank took a 3D scan of her entire cello to create an exact digital replica of her own instrument. It took 156 hours to print the cello on a 3D printer using thermoplastic filament, which was heated to its melting point and then extruded layer by layer to create all of the required pieces. As a full-size cello was too large to print in one piece, Frank created her cello from about a dozen parts. Then she reinforced the neck with steel so that it could withstand the tension from the strings. Printing and assembling the cello was only the beginning, though. This type of 3D printer creates layer lines in the finished product. Also, assembling the cello from so many pieces resulted in visible seams. Frank expertly filed, sanded, and smoothed the surfaces of the cello to finish it, making sure none of the original seams or printer lines remained visible. Next, she used Bondo, a type of filler material, to cover the cello inside and out, and then sprayed it with a 2-part automotive primer. Finally, inspired by a friend's painting, she painted and gilded her cello purely for aesthetic reasons. In its final state, the cello weighs approximately 80 pounds, 36.29 kilograms. One might think a plastic cello would be light, but Frank told me that the weight is due to the added Bondo, steel reinforcement of the neck and body, and the epoxy used to bond the seams. Please visit the exhibition to learn more about Frank's inspiration for the decorative paint and gilding on her cello and to hear the sound of it being played. The last plastic cello I'm going to show you today is a Lego cello. In 2009, artist Nathan Sawaya was inspired by Yo-Yo Ma to create his first cello out of approximately 7,000 standard Lego bricks. It took him several days. To date, he has made 2 cellos, and each is part of his global touring art exhibitions, The Art of the Brick. He said, "The cello is such a popular instrument worldwide. It has been amazing to see fans' reactions to the sculpture all over the globe." Although he makes it look easy, there was one aspect of making the cello that Sawaya found challenging. He said that the toughest part was making sure the F-holes looked accurate. He uses rectangular bricks and had to emulate the curves of the cello using little plastic right angles. In spite of this challenge, the cello turned out beautifully. Now we turn to the section of our exhibition on fiber cellos. Cellos made from carbon and other fibers are a promising way forward for cello making. Many are more durable than cellos made of wood, some sound wonderful, and most are more affordable than antique wooden instruments. Perhaps this is why carbon fiber cellos are becoming more and more popular in this century. Pioneers like Lewis and Clark and innovators like Tim Dorank are forging new paths in cello making, creating carbon fiber and other fiber cellos that both look and sound beautiful without using up valuable wood resources. Now there are many options, not only of carbon fiber instruments, but other fibers as well. The fibers included in this exhibition are carbon fiber, paper, flax fiber, and even a see-through glass fiber cello. Let's start with a paper cello. Using his own patented process, Greek artist Tsonias created this environmentally friendly cello out of recycled paper. Tsonias has made 4 cellos to date. He started making cellos to have another instrument for an ensemble made out of recycled paper and textiles. Other than the fittings, a support, and strings, Tsonias made this cello entirely out of recycled paper, using a paper mache technique. In all of his instruments, the basic glue is environmentally friendly, made from flour, water, and wood glue. He also uses other adhesives at some stages in the construction, as well as water-based varnish. Although his instruments are primarily constructed out of paper and/or textiles, Tsonias uses some wood or aluminum to support the tension of the strings. Some people mistakenly think he creates his instruments from wood and then covers them with paper. This is not the process. The bulk of each instrument is constructed out of paper and/or textiles. He does this work entirely by hand, and each of his instruments reflects his own personal style. It takes him a month or more to complete a single cello. Making paper cellos is not without its challenges. Tsonias told us that although the sound quality of his instruments is very good, paper cellos tend to be less powerful than wooden ones. Another challenge is to maintain the strength and construction. In the heat, the varnish and glue soften. However, he's working on a solution and plans to patent it. Now, let's turn to a carbon fiber cello. Erica showed us her carbon fiber cello by Lewis & Clark and explained the boat building connections. Lewis & Clark makes both 4- and 5-string models, which you can see here. Lewis & Clark cellos are individually made by hand and consist of 3 parts. The first is a one-piece back, sides, and neck. The second is the top, and the third is the fingerboard. These are wonderful instruments made by carbon fiber cello pioneers. Now we turn to 3 types of fiber cello made by a new innovator in the field, the award-winning Belgian maker, Tim Doorink. For several years, Doorink has been experimenting with materials to make his cellos and combines methods of the traditional craft of instrument making with insights in material science and modern engineering. Here is his carbon fiber model. To make his carbon fiber cellos, he combines unidirectional and woven carbon fiber to create instruments that are strong and have a warm sound, a power and a richness, especially in the high register, making them ideal for solo performances outside or in large concert halls. This next cello is Doorink's award-winning cello made of flax fiber. In a quest to create a cello that was durable and environmentally friendly, and made from locally sourced materials, Tim Doorink created his flax fiber cello. He explained, flax fibers are not only some of the strongest ecological fibers available, they are native to Belgium in the region known internationally as Flanders Fields. He said that due to the natural damping of the fiber, the cello has a very mellow and warm sound, which is a timbre that makes it a favorite for many. It's not the loudest or most powerful instrument, but it's almost impossible to make the instrument sound bad. It's very forgiving to play and always sounds full and beautiful. He said this cello is ideal for recordings, performances in small venues, or performances that require amplification. Hear it for yourself in videos included in our exhibition. The final cello on our tour today is one of the most visually striking instruments in the exhibition, a glass fiber cello. Doorink described this cello as the bad boy on the block, the rebel. He said, it turns heads before playing a single note and is definitely not for everyone. It demands a cellist that knows what they're doing, but when you do, guaranteed goosebumps. This is a see-through instrument. It has a honeycomb texture, but you can see its sound post, bass bar, and its top and bottom blocks through the belly of the instrument. Cellists have described its sound as being bright, sharp, and clear. Listen for yourself in the video in the exhibition. Since creating this exhibition, we found several other instruments that we will be adding soon, including more metal church cellos, more of Moorman's ice cellos, the chocolate cello many of you have seen on social media, and a cello with a membrane as a belly. Do you know of any cellos you think we should add to this exhibition or future exhibitions? If so, please let us know. You can contact us via our contact form on our website or contact me directly, curator@cellomuseum.org. Thank you so much for being here today. Now it's time for our Q&A session, and for those attending this live event, our exhibition t-shirt giveaway. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hello. So, thanks for joining us
Brenda.
today. Hi, thank you for having me here.
Thank you. That was fantastic. You know, I'm just in awe, and thank you very much for doing this. Maybe if you could tell us, just before we continue to go to questions and answers, if you could tell us a little bit more about this short competition, or giveaway?
Absolutely. So today we have 3 t-shirts to give away, and they're of our new exhibition t-shirt design. We haven't put this out yet in our museum shop. These are brand new. And so the first 3 to get ready to copy down the email address, the first 3 to email me with all the information I request on the next slide, those 3 will receive a free t-shirt.
Okay, so we will just leave the slide here for a few seconds.
Please note that I need your address and everything, not for any sinister reasons, but just so that I can actually send you a t-shirt.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, so it's the just send your email with all the details to the the email that you can see below on the green line. Brenda, just before we go to those questions, what are your next? What is it your next exhibition going to be about, or what are your plans for the future?
So the exhibition that we're working on now is about cellos of different shapes. So this is our design. It was initially our idea, Erica's and my idea, was to put this together with the different materials, but we had too many to go in one exhibition. So this next one, there'll be very strange shapes and things that may not even look like cellos. And then another exhibition that we're working on as well is decorated cellos.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. I'm already looking forward to it. Before we started, you mentioned something like church cellos versus bass violas. Could you just tell me? Could you just tell us this story, or what is it about, or
Oh yeah. So in one of the cellos was vandalized, as you saw in the video, and someone, when they were ringing the bell, someone snuck into the church gallery, into the West Gallery, and cut 3 of the cello strings. But in the quote, they called this instrument a bass viol. Well, in the 21st and 20th centuries, a bass viol is a very different thing from a cello, and we're well aware of that. But back then, in the 19th century and late 18th century in England, one didn't want to be necessarily associated with Catholic things in a Protestant church, in the Church of England. So the word violoncello was too Italian, and even the shortened version cello was you didn't use that in a church. So the cellist would actually play what we would call a cello, sometimes made of metal, as you saw, but sometimes just regular cellos. And then they would carry it into the church, and then all of a sudden it would be called a bass viol, as is listed in the Psalms, as it's okay to play a bass viol. But then when they'd leave the church carrying the same cello and go play in the pub afterwards, well, then it became just a cello or a bass violin, or sometimes a violin with an I, misspelling of violoncello. So instead of violoncello. So it's the terminology is an interesting and tangled web.
Yeah. So what if anybody has any questions, please leave them in the comments and we will get to them. And I would just wonder about if you are, seeing any new cello doesn't for example, like glass cello. How do you approach the cello? What's the where do you start, or are you going to play it and then observe it, or just what's the first and what are the steps?
Well, it really depends, and especially during the pandemic, it's been impossible to go to a number of museums and libraries and things. Most of my research was done in person, and especially my doctoral work. I just loaded notebooks and cameras and things onto my bicycle, and then I would ride my bicycle around England and sometimes throw it on the train. And then I had a tent as well, so I'd be camping. You know, at the end of the day, I'd go and examine and measure cellos, and if they're in playing condition, I would sometimes get to play them and then take notes on all of that, take photographs, drawings. And then my last question leaving was like, where's a good place to camp tonight? So then I'd go and I'd camp and then get ready for the next day of research.
Yeah, that's something else I wanted to mention. In another interview, you mentioned that where you were traveling, you were, you know, traveling with your cello. Could you just tell us a little bit more about that?
So in one of my last trips, I took a very small cello with me that I'd had made by a maker in North Carolina. He's an English maker, John Pringle, and he's known actually for making violas da gamba, but he also makes violin family instruments. And so we worked together on this instrument, and it's small enough that I then strapped it on the back of my bicycle. So, and then I took the bicycle on the train and also, you know, mainly pushed this bicycle around. But I mean, I rode it very slowly. I kept getting passed by all these racing people, and, you know, I was loaded down with cello and tent and everything.
So could you just, if somebody wants to, you know, kind of get in touch with you, or, you know, help you, or if somebody has, you know, like a strange looking cello, or what's your advice to them, or how shall they, you know?
Well, the easiest thing is you can email me at curator@cellomuseum.org. But if that, if somehow that you don't remember that, just go to the website at cellomuseum.org and click on the contact button, and that'll take you to a page. And those emails, I see all of those emails, and sometimes it takes me a few days to get back to people, but I always try to get back to everyone. So, and I love to hear from people who have comments about cellos. I'm always learning. You know, every day is a school day. And I learn about new cellos, new cello pieces, new cello makers. It's, you know, I never know what I'm going to find in my inbox, but it's always exciting.
Yeah, fantastic. You mentioned that because of the pandemic, you included, you know, the online cello programs on your websites. Are you planning to do it even if there will be, you know, normal life, or are you planning to kind of expand it a little bit, or yeah, okay, sorry.
Okay, well, no, so what we were looking at, you know, no one really knows what's going to go on in the future. Yeah. No one that I know anyway. But if we're planning to carry on with some online events, but that we've noticed in the last 2 months that there are fewer and fewer online events to list as people go back to live concerts, because I mean, that's what almost everyone prefers, is the live concert where we get to interact with audiences. And there's no doubt that we all want that to happen. But there's also this amazing way to reach people around the globe by broadcasting a concert, say from a small town in North Carolina. Then people all over the world can see this performance. So it's both a wonderful thing, and it can be quite daunting, I think, for inexperienced performers, but it's also excellent training. So, but we want to support this sort of activity. I think it would be difficult. We had initially thought, do we include events? And the idea before the pandemic was no, we're not going to, because how do we list it? Do we only list the concerts in London? Do we only list the ones in London, Paris, New York? Where do we choose? You know, so we decided we wouldn't, because we didn't want to leave anybody out. We couldn't possibly list all the concerts around the world. So we then we saw things going online. So we try our best to find what we can, and sometimes people send us things, but it's hit or miss. And just a word to the wise out there: if you're planning an online concert, make sure that you include your time zone, because just saying 7 p.m. doesn't help us, because, you know, 7 p.m. is not the same in different places in the world. And that's one of the things we've had to chase, is trying to find time zones and things like that. So, and people can send us events, and we will do our best to list things. We can't get to everything, but we try our best.
Mm-hmm. Could you just tell us something about the cello book club, especially the last one you hold just recently?
Oh yes, I love the cello book club, and this is a book club for people who love the cello. You don't have to play the cello to be a member of the club if you just love the instrument, but you can be, find cellists and join. We have a lot of professional cellists in the club, and what we do is every 2 months we feature a book, and the last one that we had, the meeting last month was with Cariatu Cannon Mason. And so most of you might know Cari from being Sheku Cannon Mason's mom for the cello crowd out there. So, but it was Mother's Day in May in the United States. And so we wanted to feature, what is it like for a mother of cellists and other musicians? What advice could this mom of so many prodigies help us with it? She was just fantastic. It was so wonderful to meet her, and I can't recommend her book enough. It's a wonderful book, and we've had other just great books in the club. I go to our page, and our next one coming up is Kitty Lampton's The Cellist Notebook. So so we've featured 2 memoirs now, and I don't know, it was a very funny novel. I kept laughing out loud when I was reading it. And then next month is our novella, and then we have a children's book coming up, fantastic, about a flying cello case. And then we have a collection of short stories for those of you who love short stories. It's free to join the book club. You sign up, and then you'll get a number of emails from me, not all the time, just mainly lead up this is the book, this is when we're meeting, here's the Zoom details, and don't forget, that kind of email. Our other email list, I try to religiously only send once a week, but the book club, you'll get nothing for a while, and then a flurry of emails to remind you about our meetings. So like I say, I highly encourage you to join our book club. It's so much fun to meet with these authors. They're generously agreeing to meet with everyone and ask questions and answer the questions that people ask. It's wonderful.
Yeah, that's great. Could you just maybe tell us, what's the sound-wise, what's the main difference, the ice cello, metal cello, plastic? What's your experience in this?
So some of these now, I've not played an ice cello. So disclaimer, I've not played one of those yet, because Erica knew about them, and I don't believe she's played one either. But they're very, you have to go to a very cold climate, and a lot of the ice events in this last winter were canceled due to the pandemic. But it was one of I really enjoyed talking to ice cello makers working on this exhibition, and I really hope to play one. But you can hear some examples online. We've put some videos in, and for me, they're this kind of shimmering angelic noise or angelic sound. It's like this cello voice it's almost this ethereal sound that floats around. It's just so beautiful, and they're not all the same. So because it depends on the ice, and as one of the makers was talking about, he's experimenting with foam ice that makes the cello sound different. So even among ice cellos, they're not all the same. And then metal cellos, for me, they're more boomy. I have played a couple of those, but the ones I've played actually had very strange strings. They don't always have standard strings. So one, actually, it looked like it was either really old, very old, or it was twine. And I think some of it, and I thought, oh, this will never make a sound because this is twine. Rosin it up and play it though. And it has a kind of boomy sound, but it's not warm like a wooden cello. So I think it would have worked really well in those churches. And the fiber cellos, I've only played some of the different fibers. I've not had a chance to play the glass fiber or the flax fiber yet. So I'm really looking forward to that. But there's a really good sound comparison of these different cellos. And then for the Lewis and Clark cellos, a lot of folks out there watching probably even have those instruments or have tried them. But if you haven't, you can hear recordings of some very big artists out there on YouTube. And we put a few links, and also visit the Lewis and Clark site, and you can hear them. And they make more than cellos too. They make all the violin family instruments, so you can hear examples of those being played.
That's fantastic. So before we are just running out of the time, so before we will finish, I just invite, so this is the third WALTHAM Forest Cello Fest. We are right now running this Cello Week. There will be more events in following weeks. Today we have this meeting. I remember Anna Shuttleworth. She was a fantastic cello teacher and cellist, and she recently died. After this, we will have a screening of a music documentary film, Makana. This is basically a very good cello concerto. The music is written by Czech composer Irena Kosíková. And this movie was already screened in China, London, Mexico, Portugal, Prague, and other different places. Then we are running underground lunchtime recitals. They are held locally in WALTHAM Forest in London. And so for any of our events, you can just visit our website. You can click down there. It should be in the description. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, or just let us know. We got a newsletter as well. So basically, you are more than welcome to join any of our events. This video should be available on our YouTube channel. And I would like to thank you to Brenda very much, and to her Cello Museum for this fantastic event that was just like really beautiful. And I'm still, kind of metal cello, ice cello, yeah. And I'm just like, what about a chocolate cello? What is it about?
Well, we have to find out more about the chocolate cello soon.
But yeah, exactly.
I just want to. But I wanted to thank you so much for having the Cello Museum here, but also for putting together this incredible program for those who love the cello. I just really encourage all of the Cello Museum folks to have a look at the entire schedule. It's just it's mind-boggling how you've put all of this together. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Brenda. That's fantastic. Yeah. So once more. Visit our websites, or go directly now. Go to Cello Museum website to explore it, to see all those wonderful cellos. Yes, and so we are off. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Brenda, and then thank you to your colleagues. Thanks.
Thank you.